Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Lunch and Listen today. So I'm going to introduce Paul here. Paul is a CPA and CA and spent his career in the life insurance and banking industries. Paul's joined the MCCO, the Ontario Board of Directors, in 2007. He served on the Audit and Finance Committee and chaired the Building Planning Committee that ultimately resulted in this development of the new 50 Kent facility. In 2011, Paul joined the MCC Canada Board of Directors as the MCCO rep, and now participates on that board as a member at large. He is currently vice chair and will chair the board for a 3-year period commencing in September this year. And last fall, in October, November, Paul participated in a senior staff and board member learning tour of MCC programs in South Africa. He spent a week in Zimbabwe, and his presentation will focus on several of our programs that they visited in that country. So welcome, Paul. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to share with you some of the highlights from the experience that I had over a 2-week period last fall. I can't share everything because I've only been allotted a half an hour, so I've had to be selective. But there were so many wonderful things that I got to see and experience. The work that MCC is doing and the impact that we are having and how we're doing it, working through partners. I hope to give you some insight into the nature of the work and the nature of the partners that we work with in accomplishing our work there in Africa. So Zimbabwe is in southern Africa. It's bordered on the north by Zambia, on the west by Botswana, on the south by South Africa, and in the east by Mozambique. It's home to about 13 million people. 3 million of those people actually live in South Africa because the economy in Zimbabwe is so bad that people can't earn a living. So 3 million people live in South Africa where there's better employment prospects, and they work and send money back to support their families in Zimbabwe. Bulawayo is where the MCC office is located. It's the second largest city in the country, and it has a population of about 1 million people. I'll show you a picture of a jacaranda tree in a minute, and you'll see why I thought that was worthy of profiling. The political system, and you've probably read, subsequent, I think it was about 3 weeks subsequent to our trip there, the president was unseated, and things are moving ahead. But the political system was in quite a state of turmoil, and the economy. I guess the best indicator I can give you of the state of the economy, I can give you 2 indicators: 95% unemployment, and most of the arable land is sitting idle because of steps that the government took a number of years ago and essentially took all the farmland away from the white farmers and gave it to political supporters who knew not what to do with it. And prices are skyrocketing. There's a cash crisis. This is a view from the 3rd floor of the building that MCC is resident in, across the street to the local bank. Every morning around 8 o'clock there would be a lineup because at 9 o'clock the bank doors open, and most of the people would leave empty-handed. They couldn't even get cash on a daily basis. Okay, here's the jacaranda trees in bloom in late October. And there are many of them around the countryside, and one of the most beautiful trees I ever saw. So why is MCC in Bulawayo? And there are 3 primary reasons. The BIC Church is very large in Zimbabwe, and particularly in Matabeleland North and South, and we do significant work with them, and MCC always likes to partner with Anabaptist churches wherever we're doing work. This area is one of the most prone to disaster within Zimbabwe and has some of the most vulnerable communities. The focus of our work there is in peace, food security and sustainable livelihoods, health, education, and exchange programs. And I'll give you examples of most of those areas. We work with 22 partners, have 23 active projects, and work with 12 staff, 9 of whom are service workers and 3 who are national staff. So the first partner that we had the pleasure of visiting was the Ecumenical Church Leaders Forum. This is their office, and this is retired Bishop Ambrose Moyo, who's the director of the organization. And he told us that as churches, we have to play an active role for peace into a new paradigm, healing broken hearts. People are poor and they have nothing, but give them peace and we will see what they can do. God multiplies the little that we get. He said, all of our people are hurting. We are a hurting nation. Hurting people seek revenge, and healed people forgive. This is Reverend Sele Sakala, who is the program and training manager for ECLF. He outlined for us how they approach their work and provided examples from their experiences of delivering peace training and the results that they've achieved. One of our participants asked the question, what are your measures of success and how do you know you're having an impact? And he said that they see people building together. Local peace committees become gatekeepers and drivers of development in their communities. One community built a school in 6 months with no outside funds. Previous enemies meet together regularly in their communities through the work of the peace committees. They now use each other's toilets. They eat together, and their language in reference to each other has changed. ECLF is being invited into communities to conduct their training programs. I've got a booklet up here at the front that gives a bit of a history on the development of ECLF and gives more insight into the specific training programs that they conduct if anybody's interested. Our second partner that we visited was the Ecumenical Bible Institute. This is the highest BICC training institute in Zimbabwe. The site is 25 kilometers off of the highway on a washboard dirt road. And this is the principal, Mr. Nkube, at the entrance to the facility. And when we pulled into the grounds, this is what we saw. It was like arriving at an oasis in the desert. Solid buildings, neat landscaping with green sculpted bushes. Principal Nkube invited us into his home, pictured here, for a hot lunch. We sat in his living room and were presented with fresh water and a basin to wash our hands. Pretty impressive hospitality, pretty humbling experience. And then the food. Fresh vegetables from their own gardens and chicken. And for dessert, we had fresh strawberries, which came out of their own gardens on the grounds, along with yogurt. And then after lunch, the principal gave us a tour of the grounds. This is the chicken coop, where they produce their own eggs. MCC's role here in this operation was to provide funding for a borehole, to provide a reliable source of water. The first attempt was unsuccessful, but the second attempt found an aquifer at a depth of 55 meters. The hole was lined and they installed an electric submersible pump, sealed up the site with concrete, and then covered it with natural fauna so you wouldn't know it's there. And then the well is connected to a buried water line that feeds these 2 JoJo's at the center of the property. And from the JoJo's, they run drip irrigation into the fields. And they're growing incredibly productive crops of onions, beans, beets, squash, carrots, a leafy green vegetable that looks like kale, and strawberries. It felt more like being in the Holland Marsh than in rural Zimbabwe. And this was all accomplished with a $10,000 borehole. Here's the netting to keep the birds off the strawberries. This is that leafy green vegetable I referenced. And this is the principal standing in the middle of the garden, squash in the foreground, carrots in the background. And I was so impressed by this individual. In addition to being a theologian and an administrator, he's a visionary entrepreneur. I just can't imagine how he could picture what they could accomplish here if they had some water. And he has established expectations with all the staff at the school, as well as the students, that they spend a set number of hours on a weekly basis in the gardens tending them. So they're all personally invested in the project and benefit from it, as well as benefiting the community that they're part of. And the last investment that he made before we arrived, he had planted 200 orange trees here, all grafted onto lemon tree stems, because lemon trees are hardier than orange trees. And he expects he'll have fruit in 4 years. And as we walked along, these trees are planted with such precision that as you move from one step to another, you can see them all lined up in rows, just as they would be at a formal orchard in Canada. So the next partner that we visited was the Brethren in Christ offices. And Bishop Cinda Nguble addressed us. They operate a radio ministry from their offices in Bulawayo, which reaches over 1 million people in Zimbabwe. And the bishop invited us to attend the commissioning that afternoon of new broadcasting equipment that through MCC they had been able to purchase. We had 2 BIC pastors as part of our group. They attended, as well as the area director. So here's the new equipment that MCC had helped fund. That's the control panel. And this is the commissioning prayer. The next partner was the National Association of Parents of Disabled Children organization. And here are some of the members of that association. They are all parents of children with various forms of disabilities, and they offer mutual support and enhance the children's social, emotional, and educational opportunities, as well as other supports in the form of feeding and income generation. Many of the women have been abandoned by their fathers, by the fathers of their children, because of the children's disabilities. And in most cases, the children require constant care. MCC funds 2 daycares that are run by the organization. And these daycares thereby reduce the dependency that the parents have on their children by being able to leave their children at the center so that they can work and gain income for their families. 47 physically challenged children receive 3 meals per day at the center and 128 at home. And 47 physically challenged children attend school now. 173 beneficiaries have increased their income levels, and 90 beneficiaries have active and profitable businesses. This is the entrance to one of the daycares, and we had the pleasure of visiting this daycare. And this was probably the most emotional experience that I had in the 2 weeks that I was there. So inside that door, this is what we were greeted with. Many of the children in this center had muscular dystrophy. The boy at the table behind the gentleman standing there with the checkered shirt is autistic, and he was working at that table in front of the window. We were struck by the calmness and the sense of warmth and love once we entered the facility. And you could tell that the caregivers were totally committed to these children and loved them very much. This little girl had arms that terminated above the elbow. The place was spotless. It had separate rooms for food preparation and toileting, which were equally clean. And it was pretty amazing what these caregivers were doing and the impact that that was having on the children's mothers in particular, and the quality of life improvement that it was creating. And then it was the weekend, and we were invited to worship with the MCC staff at a local church. The weather had changed, and where it had been 32 degrees Celsius on a consistent basis for 2 weeks, that weekend, a front passed through, and it dropped the temperature to highs of 13 with cloudy skies, wind, and occasional light rain. This is a picture preceding the worship service where Pastor Moses Kalafula welcomed 13 new members who had been baptized on Saturday. And following the welcoming of the new church members, the whole congregation engaged in a foot washing exercise. Men on the porch outside and women in the sanctuary inside. This was also a moving experience, but for different reasons than at the daycare. The message was delivered by Bishop Cinda Ngulube, who we had met at the BICC offices the previous week. The singing was amazing, and I can still hear it. There was no accompaniment. They had a leader who would get things rolling, and then everyone joined in. Many of the people in attendance used their cell phones to have access to the words that were being sung. I just listened and was inspired. The next partner was Sandra Jones Center. And I show this picture of our group, as well as the leaders of the center, and one of the salters, she's in the middle, whose assignment on her term was at the Sandra Jones Center. I show that picture because you look at the joy on people's faces, and that's what I got to experience for the 2 weeks that I was in Zimbabwe, just observing and interacting with the partners and the recipients of the benefits that are delivered through the MCC programs. Tina and Debbie are the directors of Sandra Jones Center. It's a residential care facility for approximately 80 young women who have been abused, raped, orphaned, and or are HIV positive and have either been abandoned or removed from their home due to abuse. It provides compassion, a listening ear, and builds relationships with the girls who have lost trust in adults due to their abuse and abandonment. MCC funds a nutritional feeding program here, which has had a significant impact on the health and well-being of the residents. Prior to the introduction of the program, impetigo was common, whereas today it no longer occurs. And they keep expanding their programming, and they have developed a vocational training program to provide skills for the girls who have no previous formal education to enable them to get jobs and earn a livelihood. In the foyer of the building, their mission statement is up on the wall, as well as their aims or goals, all very worthy. But this is the poster that caught my attention. It's a quote from Dr. Seuss. Life is too short to wake up in the morning with regrets. So love the people who treat you right, forgive those who don't, and believe that everything happens for a reason. If you get the chance, take it. If it changes your life, let it. Nobody said it would be easy. They just promised it would be worth it. That one spoke to me. So yes, they have livestock that the girls care for, and a vegetable garden that produces food for their meals. The next part of our experience was in education, and we visited 2 secondary schools. The first one was, better get the pronunciation right here, Cimmyt. And these were both in the Binga province. We met with the school development committee under the trees on the grounds of the school. There are 540 students in attendance here, with more girls than boys. And that's noteworthy because that represents a shift from what the traditional statistics would show. They have a big school development committee, and we heard from each of the members in turn. Here are some of the classrooms, and they were quite proud that they've been able to develop a chemistry lab, because that enables students to go on and pursue science subjects at post-secondary level. They had the foresight, or wisdom, probably both, to hire a female chemistry teacher. And they've done that consciously to provide a role model for the girls so that they can aspire to careers in sciences. They have also developed a water conservation program where they take the rainwater from the roofs in the rainy season and channel it into this holding tank on the grounds. One of the things that they were particularly proud of was that they have created a separate washroom space for the girl children for their time of the month. And this has resulted in greater attendance on the part of the girls at the school, because they have private facilities where they can tend to their needs during that time of the month, and a shower facility in that space as well. The second school was Cimmyt, and it is 330 students. I'll get to that in a second. These are pictures of a couple of the villages that we passed on the road to get to the school. And it was 10 kilometers off of the highway on a road that you had to have a four-wheel drive vehicle to navigate. This is what the classes at the site looked like in 2013. And then in 2013, MCC provided materials and the community provided labor. And this is what the school looked like when we came in 2017. 330 students, 10 formal classrooms, 4 teacher houses that were shared by 13 teachers. And we met with the school committee members upon our arrival. It had been a long, hot day. This school is a government-approved examination center because it has the prerequisite security vault for storing exam papers before and after the state examinations. That's the vault. And classes were not in session while we were there, because exams were going to be the following week. So the students were there reviewing in preparation for the exams. And here's an example of new curriculum textbooks that the children were using in 2017. So the impacts that MCC's support in education is providing: improved quality of education through increased qualified teachers. These are remote communities, and because the schools have housing on premises, even though they're shared by a number of individuals, that has improved their ability to attract qualified teachers. There's an improved conducive learning environment as compared to out under the trees. Fewer textbooks being shared. There's more textbooks, so less sharing. Improved furniture, stationery, and sporting equipment, as well as the tools for practical subjects like chemistry. There are increased pass rates and increased energy and commitment among the teachers, students, and the community. So the final partner that we visited was the Kuli Mambo Buni Training Center. And MCC's work with this partner has increased food security at the household level by producing cereals and vegetables through the practice of conservation farming, which involves minimal tillage, planting ground covers, leaving organic material on the fields for mulch after harvest. And the average crop yields have improved significantly. 3-year average yields have more than tripled for sorghum and millet relative to the district average. and those yields are in the neighborhood of 500 kilograms per hectare now. The partners' approach is to identify lead farmers in different areas within the districts and work directly with them to teach the conservation farming methods. Their neighbors observe the lead farmers and the improved results that they obtain, and then they adopt those methods so they can obtain similar results. And through the training of 100 lead farmers, the methods have been adopted by 1,829 farmers at the time that we were there. This is meeting with the 3 staff members who run the training center. And our first stop after meeting and greeting with them was the district administration office to meet with the district administrator. The government and the politicians have their hands in many areas, and this was a necessary step before this group of people from North America was being taken around to the various projects that this organization was supporting. So the community that we visited was clearly expecting us and knew that we were coming that day. The community has councils for the key projects that have been implemented, and the projects include a dam, a garden, and a well. And interestingly, the majority of the council members are women. When we were there, it was at the end of the dry season, so there was very, very little water. But this is a riverbed that has retained sufficient water that they're still able to water their livestock in that little pond. And the Weir Dam is in the background there. And that's a close-up shot. It's made of rocks and anthill clay. And this dam was funded by a Canadian Food Grains Bank Work for Food project. So here's the anthill, typical anthill, and they take the clay from the anthill along with the rocks that they gather up in the riverbed, and they produce that dam from it. And here is the council member opening the gate to the community garden. I'll come back. The garden has 25 rows, and there is a family unit designated to tend to each one of those 25 units. So it sustains 25 families. And they water it weekly from the pond that was created by the Weir Dam. And they grow all sorts of vegetables in pretty difficult conditions. But without the dam and the pond, they wouldn't be able to do any of this. For potable water, the community dug a 15-meter deep well by hand through the rock. And they're demonstrating that they get nice clean water out of that well. This is a farmer's field. Originally it was a 50 by 50 meter plot, and he has expanded it to 50 by 85 meters. And this is the farmer who owns that plot. And he explained to us that in the first 2 years that he farmed this plot, he grew corn, and he got no crop at the end of the season. And then from the work that the partner organization had done and through the adoptive learning practices, he changed his crop from corn, maize to millet. And over the last 2 years has increased his production incredibly to the point where he has more than enough to support his family and is able to trade to produce or to buy other things for his family. So that was what the insight I wanted to give you into my experience and the partners and the work that MCC is doing there. When we finished, we were only 2 hours from Victoria Falls. So our hosts graciously drove us up, and we got to spend a couple of hours in the park. And as incredible as the work that MCC is doing, God's creation and this waterfall was very impressive. So I'd be happy to field any questions that you have on any of that or pretty much anything else.
Well, you commented the instability of the economy and so forth. Is that due in part to corruption?
Did you catch that, Katie?
Yeah,
So
can you
John's
get-
question is the desperate situation of the economy, is that due in part to corruption? And the local people that we interacted with were very careful, and that word would never arise in a public setting. But it was very, very clear. I think probably the best example was this area in the center of the country was the breadbasket of Africa. And there were thousands of acres of very productive grain land that the white farmers produced wheat from. And probably 10 years ago, the government usurped that land from the white farmers and gave it to essentially political allies and army officers. And that land is just laying idle. And there isn't enough food to feed the people. So, we didn't hear that story in the context of an example of corruption, but we observed it, asked questions, and that was, you put two and two together. So with the change of regime, I think the people certainly at MCC, the nationals that we spoke with, were cautiously optimistic that would provide a basis for starting to improve the situation for the people.
Paul, if I remember correctly, Zimbabwe has two main tribal groups. And I wonder to what extent the country is still divided into and affected by the tribalism that historically has been a part of that country.
You're absolutely right. There are two main groups, and the names of them escape me just now. I'm sure they're in my notes. Excuse me. But we had people on the national staff there who were from each of those groups, and from the ecumenical, the first group that we worked with, the faith leaders who were doing peace building. And in this booklet that I have here, there are lots of examples where through peace building efforts, a lot of those issues that you would imagine existed because of the tribalism are being overcome. So that's one of the reasons that MCC continues to support the, I can't remember the name of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have a follow-up question, Irv?
No, I think that's it.
Question related to the water projects then. So, you started off talking about boreholes and they drilled and weren't successful. And I mean, here we just generally just go down deeper. So I'm not sure what the aquifer system looks like there, but that was, there's obviously some boreholes, and then they had open irrigation or open dams as well. With my travels to Kenya specifically and Tanzania, sand dams are a big deal there. So has that concept been tried here, or would it be suitable in this part of the world?
I know that sand dams, MCC does a lot of work with sand dams in Eastern Africa, Mozambique, I think, in particular. I don't know how applicable that would be in this environment. We weren't exposed to anything like that. The boreholes, I think they vary in depth depending on what the structure is of the geology of the ground. So I know that sand dams are used in various areas. As to why they wouldn't be used in Zimbabwe, I'm not clear, Dan.
Yeah, okay.
But what I can say is the methods that they're using are producing pretty incredible results. I actually met at the center that we had our orientation in South Africa before we went out to Zimbabwe. There's a full-time service worker who had come in to get medical treatment, and she's an engineer, and she's stationed in Mozambique, and she works full-time on sand dams in that country. Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, so much for, thankful that you took your time and energy to go over and encourage our people over there and also learn as well, but I'm sure it was a great encouragement to them as well to have you all there. So if there's, you can, feel free to ask Paul more questions if you like, but we'd like to finish up and, yeah, thanks so much for coming and learning as well.